Our program this evening is Update Family and Medical Leave, Paid Family and Medical Leave. Our presenter is Sarah Labadie, and Karen Korsch is going to introduce her.
Hi, everybody. Sarah Labadie is on the staff of Women Employed since 2008 and is the current Director of Advocacy and Policy. She's an expert in a wide range of issues such as paid leave, post-secondary education and training, fair wages, and pay equity. She collaborates with various stakeholders to advance and effectively implement laws and regulations at the local, state, and federal levels, thus improving the economic status of women and removing barriers to economic equity. She has managed several coalitions, including the Illinois Paid Sick Days Coalition, the Illinois Time to Care Coalition, and the Illinois Higher Education Network. She has also spearheaded the legislative campaign to create a long-term paid family and medical leave equity, excuse me. So, welcome to Sarah, and I'll turn it over to her.
Thank you very much, Karen and Elaine. My screen and instructive. I will note it just told me my internet team that like when I need to present. So I'm here to share this. I will say that for some of you, you may have seen these slides, some of the initial slides before. I knew we were going to have a mix of people who are very familiar with this work, people who are less familiar. Elaine, I saw you came off mute. Can you hear me? Yes, I'm good. Okay. And so, yeah, so just excited to be here again to share some of the updates and where we are now, and then what we're going to need moving forward. So I want to just lead in with a little bit about myself and about Women Employed. So we're a 52-year-old nonprofit advocacy and policy organization that is dedicated to improving the economic status of women and removing barriers to economic equity. We relentlessly pursue equity for women by affecting policy change, expanding access to educational opportunities, and advocating for fair and inclusive workplaces so that all women, families, and communities can thrive. And I'm just going to run us through some of our successes. We mobilize people and organizations in person and increasingly virtually to make their voices heard about policies that affect them and their communities. Just a few years ago, we fought for the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act here in Illinois, which is now actually law nationwide because of states like Illinois that were able to prove that it wasn't an unreasonable mandate and that really it was functioning well for women. And that allows women, pregnant workers rather, to have reasonable accommodations at their workplaces. It ensures more women can stay connected to their jobs, keep working, stay healthy throughout their pregnancy by allowing them things like to stay off ladders, to sit at checkout counters, and to have water while they work. They seem pretty common sense, but unfortunately we need laws like that in Illinois and nationwide, or employers won't always allow it. And we championed the original Illinois Equal Pay Act and have made improvements to it over time. We passed a law in Illinois preventing employers from asking job applicants for their wage or salary history. And that was a first step in ending pay discrimination at work. And then just last year, we passed a law which went into effect on January 1st that requires job postings to include salary or wage ranges so that job applicants know the kind of pay they can expect. And on the paid leave side, we fought for and won paid time off for all workers across the state with the Paid Leave for All Workers Act. We further successfully secured better paid sick time and paid time off rights for workers in Chicago. And although we still don't have a paid family and medical leave program, we did work in 1993, so more than 30 years ago, to help make unpaid FMLA a reality for people across the country. But why we're here today is because Women Employed leads the Illinois Time to Care Coalition, a diverse group of stakeholders who are committed to securing paid family and medical leave program here in Illinois. The Time to Care Coalition includes organizations that advocate on behalf of low-wage workers, early childhood, civil liberties. It includes labor unions, orgs focused on women, caregivers, and more. And that includes AAUW. And we have been working to grow and strengthen our coalition to help us continue to put pressure on the General Assembly and the governor to pass a paid family and medical leave program here in Illinois. So just to set the stage, yeah, AAUW Illinois is part of the coalition, as is, I believe, AAUW Naperville. So why do we need paid family and medical leave? I mean, this might seem fairly easy for most people, but the United States is the only industrialized nation without paid leave, and only one other country in the world doesn't have some form of paid maternity leave. Illinoisans do not have access to leave, whether it's unpaid or paid. Fewer than 25% of workers get paid leave through their employer, and more than 60% can't even access unpaid federal leave through the Family and Medical Leave Act, or FMLA. And that's either because they aren't eligible or they simply just cannot afford it. And when you break that down by race in Illinois, Black and Latinx workers are 5% and 12% less likely, respectively, than white workers to be eligible for or able to afford unpaid family and medical leave. And FMLA only applies to businesses with 50 or more employees as well. So that leaves workers in small businesses, which is a large percentage of our economy, without access. I also want to, it's AAUW, so it would be a disservice if I didn't talk about the benefits to women. Illinois moms are key family breadwinners in 84% of Black families, 49% of Latinx families, and 48% of white families. Without paid leave, they are forced to make tremendously tough decisions. Either they take leave that they can't afford, unpaid leave that they can't afford, or they go back to work before they're ready, or they're in work before they're ready. Without paid leave, many women are forced to drop out of the labor force to care for children. Families, on average, this is nationwide, lose an estimated $22.5 billion in wages each year due to inadequate or lack of paid leave. And a woman who's 50 or older who leaves the workforce early to care for, say, an aging parent will lose more than $324,000 in wages and retirement. Women's inability to stay attached to their jobs because of leave needs contribute to the gender wage gap in this country, with women still earning less than men across the United States, and with large gaps for women who are Black, Latinx, Native, and for mothers. But paid leave has been shown to actually increase the number of hours worked in years, say, following a birth. New moms are more likely to stay in the workforce and 54% more likely to report wage increases if they have paid leave. Or if they take paid leave, sorry. But really, this is like a small subset of benefits for paid leave because it's good for everyone. It helps workers make sure they get the treatment they need if they're sick and stay connected to their jobs. It ensures parents can take the time to bond with a new child, that they can settle into new routines, they can find stable childcare, and it helps small businesses compete with larger companies that can afford to offer paid leave. So it's truly unconscionable that as a country, we have not figured out how to support paid leave. What kind of leave are we talking about? So I do want to talk that, like, first up is the word paid. I've already talked about the Family and Medical Leave Act, or FMLA. It's been in place since 1993. That's more than 30 years. We have not really done very much to evolve it. There are some proposals in Congress to, potentially modernize it. But the fact is we're in a tough place nationally where it's unlikely that we're going to see a lot of momentum or movement around FMLA or around paid leave. And as you saw on a previous slide, workers, even with FMLA, even if we modernize it, if it stays unpaid, there are too many workers who cannot afford to take that leave. And that's especially workers who are earning low wages, who are already barely making it and scraping by. This is like a tragic number, but 25% of mothers in the US return to work less than 2 weeks after having a baby. And the majority of them are citing that financial pressures are the reason, right? With that's well before the recommended time for postpartum recovery that doctors give for postpartum recovery, which is 6 to 8 weeks. And it's also before many childcare centers will accept infants. So what those mothers are doing to ensure that their kids are safe and healthy, and have a safe place to go and things like that, you better hope you have a very strong support system if you're put in that situation. And we're putting people in that situation. And that's only the impact of pay on parental leave. People who have a serious illness or injury or a sick or dying family member are looking at their budgets and seeing if they should choose financial stability over their own health or the health of a family member. And it does not have to be this way. We can ensure leave is paid. More workers then will be able to take advantage of it, and nobody's going to be caught between, their own health, the health of a family member, and keeping a job. So paid leave programs cover several reasons for leave, and I'll talk about what our paid leave program covers in a future slide. The most common of which are parental leave, family caregiving leave, and care for yourself, your own medical health condition. And the chart here shows that the reasons people use FMLA, with the number one being for a person's own serious health condition. And this actually holds true through other states that have existing programs. That's the number one use. And I want to mention this because a lot of times there are conversations with, people who are like, well, I understand parental leave, but, I'm not sure about medical leave. So it's important because we know why people use FMLA, why they use other programs in other states, that about 50% of the reason is for your own serious medical condition. And so having a comprehensive program that covers not just not just parental leave, but also medical leave and family caregiving is essential. I also want to note that like parental leave over maternity leave, we also don't want to I know there are several voluntary programs that are like primary parent versus secondary parent and have all these kind of restrictions like that. That's also problematic for women who are often put into the primary parent position. And as a result are then, maybe taking more leave or out of the workplace for longer. The secondary parent doesn't get that much leave, even if they want time to bond with their child. If in fact the parents want to take leave at different times over the course of the baby's first year or something like that, those things can be tremendously problematic. So it's important that we think about this sort of comprehensive approach that is both family and medical, covers parental as well. And I just want to name 60% of family caregivers are juggling paid work and caregiving. So a lot of times it's trying to figure out that balance between, is my parent going to, or sibling, are they going to require more of me? And at what point am I tipping the scale of like, can I really be working and caregiving? And so the program here really recognizes that that's another reason that people are going to need the leave. And with a program like the one we've designed, the one we're supporting, it has workers paying into it. So the other thing is that it's critical that all workers be able to use it if they need it. And this kind of full suite of reasons for leave allows for that. So we've talked about the distinction between FMLA and a paid program that would be specific to Illinois, but there are some other programs Illinois has passed or has proposed, and I just want to clear up sometimes there's confusion about them. So I mentioned the Paid Leave for All Workers Act, and I will say I've had many, many lawmakers, and this is why I want to bring this up, because I'm going to, if we talk about going to speak with legislators later, or I'm going to talk about that, I want to make sure that you understand that sometimes this is where legislators can get a little confused. And the Paid Leave for All Workers Act, which passed in early 2023 and went into effect in 2024, is where I think they really get caught up. And I'll be the first to tell you that the name is a major factor. And this was something we worked on the Paid Leave for All Workers Act. This is something that we ended up calling it paid leave for legal reasons, but it's really short-term paid time off. You can use it for any reason. You could use it for vacation. You can use it for personal needs. You can use it because you got to go to the doctor, obviously, or you're sick, or you just need to get your car worked on or something like that. But at the end of the day, it is short-term leave, and it's meant to be used for kind of short-term illnesses or emergencies or things like that. And after we passed it, the city of Chicago also passed a new ordinance that provides up to 5 days of paid sick time or paid leave, and paid leave rather, another 5 days for that. So the words can get a little confusing, but they are fundamentally different. We've also had the business opposition raise with us, like, didn't we already do this? Which is not in good faith. They know there's a difference between the two. However, the name does trip people up and they get confused. And so it's important that we are, clear about what the differences are. I also did want to mention another relevant law that actually helped us evolve our bill and passed last year, or passed this year actually, is the Family Neonatal Intensive Care Leave Act. I know that's a mouthful, but it provides Illinois workers at businesses with 16 to 50 employees with up to 10 days of unpaid job protected leave when they have a child who's in the NICU, the Neonatal Intensive Care Unit, and workers at businesses with more than 50 employees with up to 20 days. This is, again, it's unpaid, but it did help us think about ensuring, and I'll talk about this more, how we would infuse that kind of leave into our paid family and medical leave program. And there have been other efforts in Illinois to provide tax credits to businesses, to provide some expanded leave to firefighters, and other proposals that I'm sure we'll see. So it can get a little confusing between the rights that already exist and the rights that are being proposed. But our bill is, sort of a comprehensive, inclusive version of paid leave and what we're supporting. We created this graphic, so I wanted to show it, but this is what identifies some of the differences between a short-term program and our long-term program. Again, short-term care is like hours, days, long-term care, weeks. And so what we don't have in Illinois yet is that weekly, longer-term version of care. All right, so where is paid family and medical leave at this moment in time? So there have been a couple of efforts nationally to offer paid family and medical leave. One of them is the Federal Employee Paid Leave Act, or FEPLA, which offers 12 weeks of paid parental leave to federal employees. And then during the pandemic, there was long-term paid leave available to help parents who had children whose either schools or daycares were closed as a result of the pandemic. And then you may have heard that in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, they made permanent a tax credit to businesses that are offering paid leave voluntarily. But none of this is a comprehensive paid leave program. None of this is really helping workers who are in that 76% who don't get any paid leave through their job. These are all, yes, there is some hope, I think, at the federal level that we're getting some very small wins and some limited momentum toward paid family and medical leave, but it's really not what we need and what we want. And the universal federal program is still out of reach. I do want to say that there were some efforts under the Biden administration to do some more comprehensive work through the Build Back Better Act that ended up not being successful. But then yesterday, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand and Representative Rosa DeLauro announced the introduction of the Family and Medical Insurance Leave Act, or the Family Act. And this is something that they've been introducing for more than 10 years, but it's evolved into a program that's really very progressive. They were joined at the press conference by Representative Lauren Underwood from Illinois, and the sponsors in the Senate include both Senator Duckworth and Senator Durbin. So Illinois has good representation as supportive of the federal program, but, and I'm sure this comes as no surprise, the likelihood that the Family Act moves in the next few years is just very, very slim. And so states have taken up the charge. And so as you can see from this map, there are 13 states that have their own programs, including one of our neighbors to the north, Minnesota. It's not just folks on the coasts, and obviously Colorado as well, sitting there in the middle of the country. And DC also has a program. So this is basically the only way we're going to get this in the next few years. We have to have a state program. All right, I'm be honest, you're gonna go, these are my very, very lengthy, wordy slides. And so I'll walk through them. We have been working on this legislation in earnest for about 5 years. And I know that sounds like a long time. It took us 15 years to pass the Paid Leave for All Workers Act. So I just wanna caution us to think that that is a long time. Progress takes time, and it needs to be a thoughtful bill. It needs to be a well-conceived bill. It involves asking people to pay into it and things like that. So, we don't want to just throw anything out there. And for a long time, there were in Illinois sort of messaging bills that were a page and a half that just said we need paid family and medical leave. And that's, we have moved on from that, right? And really built something that will stand the test of time, that is sustainable. But we have been required to overcome some obstacles. So obviously some of those obstacles, we were interrupted by the pandemic. And the General Assembly was either not meeting or was only meeting virtually. And that just set us back in ways that, were not productive. We were then surprised by the introduction of a competing bill sponsored by Senator Christina Castro and supported by the Women's Bar Association of Illinois. And they had been a member of our coalition. And so it was a little bit of a surprise to us when they introduced their own bill. It was largely focused on like the needs of parents. So it had it was comprehensive. It did include medical leave and family caregiving leave. But if you read through it, it had things like leave needed to be taken continuously. If anybody has ever had a medical need, say cancer, and you're doing chemo every 2 weeks, and in the intervening weeks, you find potentially in a parental leave context where your child is you're just caring and bonding with your child for the course of their first 3 months or 4 months, just because it wasn't meeting the kind of needs of all parties. It also was really focused on the needs of employers over workers, which is not something our bill focuses on. Our bill is really worker driven. But we were told by Senate leadership that we needed to find common ground between these two bills in order to move the work forward. So we were able to do that. But one element of working with the Women's Bar included contracting with a national expert to run various scenarios to really understand the cost of different policy choices. And this was like a real bone of contention because I think the Women's Bar had run their own numbers using sort of like back of the envelope numbers, and they were wildly different than the experts' numbers. And so it was important that we have that kind of stop and step to make sure that we were on the same page in terms of what it was going to cost. I am happy to say we were able to come together with the Women's Bar, Senator Castro, our chief sponsor, Senator Ram Villavalam, and introduce a unified bill in 2025 in the Senate with Senator Villavalam as the chief sponsor and Senator Castro as the chief co-sponsor, and then in the House with Representative Anna Moeller. And it still largely adheres to the values and principles of our coalition. And then during this time, we really worked to strengthen the coalition, ensuring that we have representation from more affected people too, because we want to make sure that, we're not like making up what people are experiencing on the ground or what they need if they have particular caregiving needs. So we now have more representation from a disability rights organization, from workers' rights centers, and from the affected people in those groups as well, to ensure that we're speaking to the broadest possible group. And we're not forgetting pieces of our economic engine or how people work or how they experience caregiving, because we want to make sure this really is helpful to all people. And we've created materials, bill fact sheets, one-pagers, things like that that are helping make sure we can move this work forward. So I just want to ground you in the principles of our coalition, and I'll explain why these are sort of where this comes from too. So our coalition principles, which you can see on the screen, sorry, my screen is over here, your screen is right there. Our coalition principles are steeped in the idea that the details of a paid family and medical leave program really matter. There is very broad support for a program like this. You'll see that there's pretty broad support for paid leave as a concept, but how the program is crafted really does make a difference for who benefits. And so, for instance, you may remember in the first Trump presidency, there was a federal proposal which basically would have stolen from your social security to pay for your leave. So that would have basically robbed Peter to pay Paul, leaving you with limited retirement benefits in the future because you took your paid leave now, and that stripped some of your social security away from you. And I'm going to be honest, with women already earning less, with a gender wage gap, with women having less in retirement savings, all that kind of stuff, That's a double hit for us. That was a no-go, right? Like the devil is in the details there. But we do know that a strong, comprehensive, universal, and inclusive program is one way. It's not going to do it, but it's one way we can start to close the gender wage gap. And so that does have to do things like include all workers, no matter where they live or work or what kind of job they have or how big their employer is. It has to replace enough income that workers can actually afford to take the leave. It has to provide enough time and cover the ranges of needs that workers face. So health, we've already talked about this, their own health, health of a family member, and welcoming a new baby. And then, there are things like it needs to have a sustainable funding source that is affordable for workers, employers, and government, that's built around or that's seamless and easy to understand. And for us, it was really important also to have an inclusive definition of family, and I'll talk more about that too. Okay, this is probably my longest little speaking part. I'm going to try and go through some of the major components of this unified bill. We've infused our coalition principles into the bill, and we've also included and infused lessons we learned from the limitations of FMLA and what other state programs have done. And we made some concessions already in this conversation that we've had with the Women's Bar before we even started negotiating with business opposition. But we still feel like where the bill is right now really provides what we need to meet these values and to do the things that we know the paid family and medical leave is supposed to do. So some of the major components of the bill include the reasons for leave. So that's to welcome a new child, to care for yourself if you're seriously ill or injured, to care for a loved one who's seriously ill or injured. And then there are two that I haven't really talked about. One is to take leave if you're a victim of domestic violence or sexual assault. And one is to take leave for military-related reasons, particularly if somebody is deployed. The bill includes 18 weeks of leave for those reasons, for those 5 reasons, with an additional 9 weeks of leave to maintain a healthy pregnancy or if your child is in the NICU. So we talked about that a little bit. That ensures that somebody who might need to take leave, I know doctors don't really prescribe bed rest anymore, but somebody who's maybe encouraged not to be on their feet as often or to do something like that, that would be sort of like a medical reason that they could take that additional 9 weeks of leave and it doesn't bite into their bonding time with their baby. And similarly, if your child is in the NICU, you're not, that's a stressful situation. That's not something you're doing from home, where you're kind of getting your routines together and you're starting to figure out how either how this fits into your life with other children or whatnot. But you wouldn't lose time, that bonding time there either. So those are the additional 9 weeks kind of for those purposes, and then 18 weeks for the other reasons. We do need enough time to care for ourselves, to bond, to care for other family members. And I will just say, so and I'll talk about the inclusion, the family definition in a second, but my best friend and roommate at the time was diagnosed with cancer when she was 27. She is in remission, has been for a long time now, but her parents lived out of town. They did not have paid family and medical leave. They could not take the time off to care for their 27-year-old daughter. And so I was her caregiver in this moment. And I will never forget sitting in the chemo suite while she was getting her chemo treatment and listening to a woman tell the nurse that she might have to stop coming in because she was almost out of the PTO that she was using, right? Like vacation, a combination of maybe vacation time and sick time. And she was in danger of losing her job. And if she lost her job, she was going to lose her health insurance. And her health insurance was what was allowing her to get the chemo that she needed to stay alive. And it was just this horrible catch-22. And so having sufficient time, enough weeks so that people can get the kinds of treatments they need. Some people are going to need 2 weeks and some people are going to need the full 18. And the woman in the chemo suite, whose name I never learned, she deserved the time she needed to be treated. And PTO was not the answer. Even with a good job, even with sufficient or a lot of PTO and a lot of sick time, you may not have enough. And so that's why a program with this amount of leave is necessary. It's also critical the program be affordable on the front end. So how much are we asking workers and employers to contribute? And is that is it sustainable for those with the fewest financial resources? And on the back end, are we providing enough wage replacement that those who are already barely making ends meet can actually take the leave? If we don't make it affordable, we're asking people to contribute without being able to take advantage of the program, and we're subsidizing some of the wealthier workers who are already far more likely to have paid leave. So, what we don't want to do is kind of create this program where nobody who's earning low wages is actually able to afford to take it. And so they are contributing to a program that is allowing wealthier workers to take leave that right now their employers may be covering the cost. I've touched on the definition of family that is important. And for us, that's a definition of family that reflects our real world in 2025. We know many of us were raised by a village. We expect to give back to that village someday by caring for members of the village. We also know women are often called on to be those caregivers by a wide margin. And that goes beyond spouses, parents, and children. It's in-laws, it's brothers, it's aunts, it's grandpas, it's even those who might not be technically related to us, but are found family nonetheless. And I mentioned that I cared for my roommate, so obviously that was like a found family situation because I was the closest person to her at the time. My mom also cared for an unmarried brother at the end of his life. And at the moment in FMLA, and this is one of the lessons we've learned, family is considered spouses, parents, and children. That's just not the reality that we live in here. That's a limitation on who counts as family, and it really discounts who we actually live with and love. Some other lessons we learned from FMLA: we need to cover workers of all sizes. As I mentioned, FMLA only covers workplaces with 50 or more employees. Many of us work for small businesses, and myself included, and would not or do not qualify for FMLA. I'm lucky, obviously, because Women Employed has a generous paid leave policy. Thank God. We live up to our values on that front. But crossing your fingers and hoping that you win the employer lottery is just not good policy. And so FMLA requires workers to work a certain number of hours and for a full year before they're eligible. And our program is focused instead on the amount of money you earn. It keeps that threshold low, and it doesn't require you to work for a certain amount of time before you're eligible. And in fact, you would still be eligible for paid leave even if you'd been unemployed for a while. And I know some of those components might sound strange when you first hear them, but I want to give you a few examples of why it's so necessary. So FMLA requires you to have worked 1,250 hours in the prior 12 months. That comes out to about 24 hours a week. It allows employers to keep workers under that threshold, right? Like I've worked in retail, I've worked in food service. A lot of times they would keep you under a threshold. They'd keep you around 20 hours a week so that they didn't have to provide benefits. And this is one of the benefits that you would be able to take advantage of. And that means that they don't have to worry about your absence. Yes, it's unpaid, but they still might not want to have to replace you or not replace you, hold your job, in fact, because it's job protected leave. And it means that workers who might be working around other care responsibilities or are forced into part-time work aren't eligible. And so by using earnings, we ensure that workers who work less still, they're going to draw down, a prorated amount of money that is still based on their actual earnings, but they have access to this because they're paying into the program. Or if you work multiple part-time jobs, again, you would still be covered and you'd just be taking the leave from both jobs, getting the pay, kind of the comprehensive pay from both. Still prorated. So let's say we had a program in Illinois, and as you heard in my bio, this is why we don't want a waiting period. As you heard in my bio, I've been with Women Employed since 2008, so more than 17 and a half years. If I change jobs next year and we had a waiting period, like a year of FMLA, I might have to wait before I could actually take the leave that I've been paying into for 17 years. So we want to make sure that because this is a program where people are paying in, that there's no lapse between, that the job they're in is not really relevant, because what's most relevant is how do they experience the leave that they've been paying into. And then I'll just be honest, like, we know sometimes employers will choose to lay off workers when they announce that they're pregnant or that they have some kind of serious illness. It's, they'll give a different reason for it. Sometimes also, like, we work a lot with tradeswomen who might have, sort of a job for 3 months and of like building a house, and then they're waiting to learn what their next job will be. And so technically there's a period of unemployment in between those two jobs, even though generally, they move from job to job with just like a short period in between. And so again, a waiting period is problematic for that purpose. When employers lay somebody off, if that kind of discrimination happens, we don't want workers losing that benefit that again they've paid for. So it would cover workers who had been recently unemployed, ensuring that like any kind of discrimination or just like sort of the cyclical nature of a job might not hurt workers more. And finally, workers will not take leave if they aren't sure they have a job to come back to. So job protection, protecting somebody's job is absolutely essential. I will say this bill can't do everything. It is still dependent on how much an individual worker makes. So if you're, underpaid or experiencing pay discrimination, like this isn't going to help solve that for you, but it will solve the fact that you will have pay instead of just taking time out of the workforce without it. It is confronting the gender wage gap, but it's not, able to fully solve it. All right, so what's to come? We still have obstacles to overcome and work to do. Most states have had the vocal support of their governors. We are working on building up the championship from the Pritzker administration. And then we also need to continue building support among legislative leaders and of course, rank and file members. And while the program is ultimately self-sustaining, one of the kind of challenges we have in this time is that it does require an initial investment to get off the ground. It's not a huge investment. It's about $50 million over the course of 3 years. But, we need to set up the IT system for the program, and it's expensive. I mean, to set up a system that can, take a percentage of workers' wages, take a percentage from both employers and employees, that can then pay those out, that can evaluate claims, all these different kind of things. You need to have a pretty robust system. That's about 80% of that $50 million cost. And it's unfortunately not even something we can really if we were to change a policy that it would make any real difference in, because if we change any of those policies, like if we decided fewer weeks, it doesn't really change much. It's just like the back end, you change like a filter or something like that in the IT system. It's not going to change the fact that you still have to create the structure. But the benefit is, yes, it's a $50 million investment, but that money can get paid back either as directly paid back to the government by the actual program itself, or it can be the state's initial investment into the program as an employer. But if you know anything about Illinois at the moment, we are facing not just a challenging budget sort of generally, but one that will likely get more stretched because of cuts from the federal government that Illinois has to decide, are we going to cover these cuts or what are we going to do? And then in the next few months, so we've had initial meetings with business. I will say they've been, they haven't necessarily been tremendously fruitful. I think some of them came shortly after the Paid Leave for All Workers Act was passed or went into effect. And, so they didn't want to have these conversations, but that's been around for over a year and a half, in effect for over a year and a half. So we want to make sure that we're getting back to negotiations with business so that we can start to find some common ground, maybe amend the bill, figure out where we might be able to find some compromise. We are working on mobilizing our coalition. So we have a town hall meeting next month. We are finalizing the invite right now. I will make sure the invite comes to this group. It's virtual, so we hope you can join us. We're going to have a teach-in where we're going to go really deep into the specifics of the bill in early 2026. And then we are planning an advocacy day in Springfield in either March or April. So look out for those things and stay involved. And further, we're working on external communications campaign to put pressure on all policymakers from the public. So keeping paid leave top of mind. I will name proactive campaigns are tough in this time. There are lots of things competing for our attention in media, and some of those, a lot of that's reactive. So we're going to find the areas where we can, build on the fact that we need paid leave and that this is really something essential. And I'll say, for instance, in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, there are some cuts to or sorry, yeah, there are some cuts to Medicaid. And like, there is a rationale for how we ensure that those cuts are not, like Illinois does not have the budget to fully supplant those cuts. One way is ensuring that caregivers have paid leave through their employers so that if they are, if they have to take time off to care for a family member or something like that who might have been getting services in a different way, that we have a paid leave as a backup. And it's really pretty close to revenue neutral, obviously, with that small investment that gets paid back. And so, there are some connections like that that we want to forge as we're thinking about these other things that are sort of dominating the media. And you can take part in all of this. And I do want to say one of the big things, and I'm going to talk about what you can do next, is to share your story or stories of other people. So I've already talked about how some of the, AAUW Illinois and Naperville are very connected into this coalition. I see some of my friends on the call. So I assume that's a way that people will stay connected. We will be sharing information about our upcoming events that are open to you all. But we do need more stories from Illinois workers who lack or lacked at some point in their time paid leave. This helps us understand, again, the realities of what's happening across the state and what people do have access to or not. It also, as you know, helps humanize the story. Those 76 and 62% numbers, 76% of Illinoisans don't get any paid leave through their job. 62% can't even afford to take unpaid leave or aren't eligible for it. Those are good numbers and damning numbers, but they don't tug at the heartstrings in the way that somebody explaining that they couldn't take leave that they needed to care for their dying parent or something like that is going to like confront a legislator with or confront the governor with. So if you have a story to share, would love to know more about it. My email is right here, so please reach out. Or if you know somebody who has a story who you want to connect to me, please do. And then just like generally, we need you to express support for a comprehensive, inclusive paid family and medical leave program with the people you're coming across every day. So that includes legislators, but also with neighbors, friends, family, church groups, book clubs, volunteer organizations, more. We want people to feel like this is possible. We want this is possible, right? We have obstacles to overcome, but if 13 states have done it, Illinois can do it. If Minnesota has done it, Illinois can do it. And so we need this to feel urgent and to feel real to more than just the few of us sitting in this room today and the members of our coalition and the workers we're organizing. But a bigger groundswell than that will never hurt us. And so with that, I'm going to drop the slides and see if there are questions. Sorry, that was a lot of talking at. I apologize.
Let's see. There was a question that somebody emailed, wasn't there? Do you have that?
I do. So the question that was emailed was, how does occupational segregation and the prevalence of part-time work impact the ability of women to be able to utilize paid sick and family leave, even if it's offered in some cases? And I did try to talk a little bit about this. I think occupational segregation, the challenge there is something that we probably can't solve with this bill. And that's the reality is like, we are occupationally segregated. The goal here is that everybody has access to this. And I didn't really touch on this, but one thing is like gig workers and self-employed workers there was in our initial version of this bill, we did try to address some of that kind of like gig work, independent contractor work. And this bill, it can't be the thing that solves for misclassified workers. And it was one of the things we lost when we talked to the Women's Bar Association. So in that regard, I know there are like lots of people who end up in those situations, not necessarily occupational segregation on that front, but just concerns about that. But they can opt in as self-employed people. So they would have to pay the employer and employee contribution, but self-employed people, gig workers, people who are in sort of even if they're misclassified, what I would maybe consider misclassified independent contractors until we figure out how to better classify those groups of workers, could do that. but it doesn't solve for things like occupational segregation, besides the fact that it makes sure that workers who are in all of those industries are able to access the program. It's trying to be as comprehensive as possible. In terms of the part-time work, I did try to address this a little bit with kind of speaking to that it's not hours-based. Eligibility is earnings-based, and that threshold is low. It's $1,600 over the course of 4 quarters. So we're talking about you could earn pretty little and work pretty little and still be eligible for the program. And that was really intentional because we know there are people who are working, maybe they're covering the cost of something important in their house and only working 10, 15 hours a week just to, maybe it's childcare, although I don't think you could work 10 to 15 hours and cover your cost of childcare, but something like that. And they would need to take the time off, and that money is like the difference maker in their household. So we want to make sure as much as we can, we are trying to make this possible for even very part-time workers, people who are not earning a ton of money. And that's why we went, instead, there's no hourly component, it's earnings based. And
Okay.
yeah.
Ken has a question in the chat. It says, are the programs that are in place in other states similar to this?
There are basically 2 types of programs. They are similar to this. 4 states, let me see if I can remember them. New Jersey, Rhode Island, California, and Hawaii put into place something called TDI, temporary disability insurance, shortly after the Second World War. And this was largely for vets who were returning who had existing medical conditions, who, would need to have time off regularly, perhaps to get continuing surgeries, things like of that form. And so they had this kind of like this temporary disability program that was really about medical leave. And actually there's a whole very sexist reason to why pregnancy was not initially counted in that, or it was, and then it was stripped out for certain states and things like that. And in those states, with the exception of Hawaii, they have layered on top of it family leave, so the family caregiving leave and the parental leave. And so they have these existing programs that have been around forever. And then in more recent terms, like I think all in the 2000s, they have layered on family and parental leave. In the most common new program is much more similar to this, right? So in the states that did not have TDI, Oregon, Washington, Minnesota, Maryland, Delaware, New York, like those states, Massachusetts, those states have all created a comprehensive single program because they didn't have to build off an existing medical focused program. So yeah, so those states have something that's much more similar to this. And our program kind of sits between, maybe like, it's learned a lot from some of these states. Like for instance, it's really important to us that employers and employees have skin in the game, and not all states have that. We've learned California had a lower wage replacement, closer to like 60 to 70%. I think it was like a little bit scaled. And they found that, it wasn't helping. Low wage workers were not taking part in it. So they've recently adjusted that to ensure that it was more comprehensive. So we've learned those kinds of things and embedded them into the bill to make sure that we're kind of taking the best practices from other states and what they've learned and building that into ours. I will just I'll lift up from the chat that there will be a recording. They're going to email the link out. So if you missed my very long speech in the front end, it'll come to you.
Yes, yes. So yeah, there's a lot of information there in your presentation. So it's a lot to digest. I know I've heard, parts of it before. So, it gradually sinks in. But yeah, it's a lot. But I, for one, really appreciate the work that you're doing to get this done.
Well, hopefully, I know this is something AAUW supports, and so hopefully it's the work we're all doing to get this done. What are the main concerns of employers? Okay, that's a good question. So, I mean, this is a little bit of a challenge because we have not had great conversations with employers. I will say I know some of the things that they've shared with us. They don't want to pay into the program. Um, and that's understandable, obviously, like if they don't have to be part of the contributors. For us, that's that's kind of where the rubber meets the road a little bit in the like we don't want to subsidize a program that employers have uh benefit from, right? Like this is a benefit that we would be offering. They could layer on top of it if they wanted to be more competitive. If they wanted to pay 100, it's 90%, the wage replacement rate is 90% in the bill. They could add that additional 10%. They could offer additional weeks of leave. They could offer additional reasons for leave. There are all kinds of things employers could do to improve upon this. And it cuts their costs, right? If they're now splitting it with employees. So, that's one thing that we are pretty set on, but they are pretty opposed to. I think they'd want fewer, we know they'd want fewer weeks of leave. We know they have some concerns with other, so there is in the, one of the concessions and conversations we had and where we landed is that there is an opportunity for like a private plan in the bill. So you don't have to be part of the state program. You could have an equivalent private program. And a lot of insurance companies now have like built these private programs, so that they're sort of comparable to a state program, but then, there's an insurance broker involved. And so they make some money off of that. Whereas the state is obviously not making money off of providing paid family and medical leave. But that's an option that we allowed, and I think is important to them, that are in the bill. We basically require that it be as generous, if not more generous, than the state policy and things like that. So they might have quibbles with things like that. So I mean, but largely it's paying into it. It's the number of weeks. They're going to want more control over it. At present, they have very little control over whether or not somebody is eligible. That eligibility is determined by the state, which we feel is very, very important, because the states really has no skin in this game, right? Besides just like making sure the payments go in and out and things like that. But they don't have a reason to deny somebody eligibility beyond, if they don't meet the dictates of the criteria. An employer does have a reason to do that. And I will name, like in Connecticut, which has the program is privately run. So it's run by, now I can't remember, Cigna or Aetna. But it's privately run, and they've denied claims at a higher rate than, like the state would. Again, we don't want the involvement of people who are trying to make money is something we don't think benefits workers or employers really. And so it's important to us, maybe less important to employers, that the state be sort of a neutral party between the employer and employee.
Definitely. Anybody who has to deal with their health insurance on a regular basis and when they're receiving care knows that that's not the ideal system. So
House and home insurance, car insurance, any of those, you're just hoping you just pay and you don't ever have to deal with them. But in this case, that's something. Do they have concerns about validating the reason for leave? I think so. I think there are some challenges with some of our reasons for leave. So for instance, one of the reasons for leave, and this is, I want to say it's like it's a very small take up, but it is an essential piece, is the for reasons related to domestic or sexual violence, or what we've termed safe leave in many cases. And not all people who experience gender-based violence go to like a health professional, right? Some of them may have conversations with their pastors or with people who work in domestic violence shelters, or other people, and never actually go to the doctor to get it. And so we have opened up some of those reasons, like some of those validations, so that people don't have to do that. I think, there may be issues with that. We've also, we wanted to be thoughtful about how people certify their medical leave, and particularly the family caregiver leave. Again, this is something where when we're thinking about low paid workers, their access to the medical system, because it's so expensive, their access to the medical system, to their doctors, their choices to go to the doctor. I mean, this is probably true of all of us because, who loves going to the doctor, but getting forms filled out and things like that can sometimes be a challenge. And so we've tried to be as thoughtful about that while also still maintaining an element of validation. But yes, I'm sure there will be concerns that people are just getting things filled out by at random. But we have evidence from FMLA that there is not a tremendous amount of fraud happening in our FMLA system. We can go after people, the employers can file, if they think people are doing this fraudulently, things like that. So I think that gets way blown out of proportion. And if you talk to anybody who works in employment law, far more often employers are violating and discriminating than we have the problem coming from the worker side. Yeah, Elaine. So, I mean, what we can surmise is from what other states have done. And so we have evidence that suggests that there is so California has had a program for a long time. So I'll use California as an example, but something like 90% of I have stats somewhere, but 90% of employers in California said that they had no problem implementing this, that it increased employer productivity, decreased turnover. They've mostly seen positive results from paid family and medical leave. I think they just did an evaluation in it's New York or New Jersey that that looked at similar things, and employers were like, actually, this has been pretty nice. So there are definitely those kinds of selling points. I think we also have small, nationally, the Main Street Alliance, and in Illinois, the Small Business Majority. So smaller businesses are in favor of this because, quite frankly, it makes them more competitive. They cannot provide, let's say, 3 months of leave up front often. That's a challenge when they might be on the margins in terms of their bottom line and things like that. Whereas, let's say a small law firm like us can't offer it, but a bigger law firm can. And so they're losing lawyers to the larger law firm. And so our small businesses have said, this actually is something we can support because we can build it into our business plan, build it into the cost of an employee, instead of having to upfront to figure out how to give 3 months of leave and pay for somebody and maybe bring somebody else in and, what that looks like. And so there is a lot of evidence like that. There's evidence the small business majority small business majority and Main Street Alliance have kind of lifted some of those things up and what they care about too. Whether or not employers believe that this is true or see the satisfaction, it's I think the cost of turnover is 21% of a new hire is 21% of the salary of that employee while you're missing it. And it's you could just keep an employee on, basically on the payroll and not have to pay that and figure out how to staff for them for, 18 weeks. Or just again, for medical leave, it might be that you have a surgery and you're down for 3 weeks or something like that. Not everybody is taking full 18 weeks of leave, and this allows you to provide that. Yeah, I can send it over. I'll send it over. We have it in English and Spanish, and I can send it in both. And yeah, I'll make sure you have access to it.
That'd be great. Yeah, thanks.
I know we're at time. So if there are any pressing questions, thank you, Elaine, for filling out the questions.
Oh. So Elaine, did you want to close us out?
Sure. I'm not seeing any more questions, so we'd like to thank Sarah for presenting all this information, and it's been great to get all the details. So thank you, Sarah, and thank you everyone for spending your evening with us.